From Louisville, Kentucky, this is The Truth as We Know It for Thursday, July 9th, 2026. I'm your host, Michael Price. Tonight, we explore the deep dynamics of hope and hopelessness. We examine how these forces shape individual lives and collective history. Joining us tonight is our special guest, Rabbi Elena Stein. She is the rabbinic chaplain at Good Samaritan Hospital in Cincinnati, Ohio. Rabbi Stein navigates crises daily with patients and their families. She also brings a deep historical perspective on the endurance of oppressed peoples through the millennia. Here with me to analyze this vital issue from their own perspectives are David Wunderlin, David Vislisel, and Larry Clements. As I was indicating, very excited about the evening. Thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it. And I guess we start by having you do a bit of an introduction and tell us a little bit more, I guess, about what it is you do, and in addressing specifically the issue of hope, which Larry, we were just mentioning. She sent out some quotations that we'll be referring to later on. And I also sent just some quick research I did to try to explore the difference between a Christian, a Jewish, a Muslim, a Hindu, a Native American view of hope. I've hoped that was, I hope that was of interest.
Yeah,
So please go ahead.
sure. I'll go back and read those, and I sort of am focusing my remarks on my perspective as a Jew on hope. But yeah, I'm an ordained rabbi, so a leader of a scholar of Jewish law and letters, they call it. But I'm also a board certified chaplain. I've been board certified for over 20 years, which means that I'm trained to work with people of all faiths. Most of the patients and medical professionals that I see are not Jewish. It's actually rare for me to meet with a Jewish patient or another Jewish chaplain at work, which is kind of unsurprising. Only 2% of the US population is Jewish. And more than half of those folks live in New York, California, Florida, or New Jersey. So being in Ohio, I don't really get to see that many Jewish patients. And I really feel very called to serve all people out in a world where these places that people don't normally come for religion. I do really strongly believe there are many paths up the mountain, and the only one wasting their time is the one running around that mountain trying to tell everybody else they're on the wrong path. They just don't get anywhere. Yeah, so my patients seek hope. For much of my career, I specialized in working with people who had blood cancers. So people who desperately wanted to live and were seeking hope while staring death in the face. But now in behavioral health, I am often serving people who want to die. In this world where life is hard and people can hurt us, they wonder if hope can be found. My work is very gratifying. I love what I do, and I've learned a lot about hope from all of my patients, every faith, little faith, and no particular faith sometimes. I'm seeing that more and more actually. So, the Jewish experience of hope. No two Jews have the exact same experience. I believe, that we all come from God's hand, Jewish or not Jewish, and we're all fingerprints of that hand. No two people are alike, much less Jews, even though we are all of divine heritage. There's a saying that says, where there are two Jews, there are three opinions. Um, so I'm sort of sharing my opinion that is from a historical perspective and a little bit of a PhD in life and living with Jews and learning about other Jews. So Judaism itself, I think, is born of hope, but not optimism. Judaism, the Jewish people, really began in earnest in the year 70 CE. Before 70 CE, there weren't Jews as we think of Jews today. The people, I don't know what you want to call us. I mean, the word Jew isn't in the Old Testament, so I don't know what you want to call us then. But we lived in Judea, the land of Israel. Our entire universe, that universe of the 12 tribes, centered around the temple in Jerusalem. The people, we were who we were, basically, because of where we lived. Our religious life and our national life were intertwined, and they revolved around the agriculture of the land of Israel. So bringing animal or grain sacrifices according to what was going on in agriculture at that time, and all of that was overseen by priests and Levites who kind of ran the temple. Um, Judaism, like what I do today, I don't know how familiar you are, but the lighting Hanukkah menorahs, having a Passover Seder, the liturgy I recite nearly every day, none of that was taking place in before 70 CE. Um, but then in the year 70, the Romans destroyed the temple. And that really should have been the end of my people. Really, every other people in the course of history ceased to be once their land was conquered and their government destroyed. Um, my people did not feel optimistic at that time. The Book of Lamentations describes the aftermath of the destruction of the temple, and it is a book of lament. It is not sunny. I don't know if you've ever read it, but really not sunny. Um, so our hope as a nation with no state any longer came in the form of Pharisaic Judaism. Jewish groups during that first century debated what to do in light of the destruction of civilization or of Jewish civilization or whatever you want to call it as we knew it. And the plan that a sect of Jews called the Pharisees, their plan is what survived, what was implemented, and what ended up forging a path of Jewish law and Jewish life, a path that would sustain the Jewish community and our relationship with God, come what may. We developed synagogues, which were places of study, worship, and meeting, as opposed to places of burnt offerings. Rabbis arose as the interpreters of Jewish law. We still remembered our priestly and Levite classes, the ones who ran the temple, giving them some special honors in our worship service, even today, but they didn't have oversight over worship as they had in temple times. We developed all these systems of law that kind of evolved and developed and can even address modern questions like, I work in a hospital, is in vitro fertilization an acceptable Jewish choice? When is it Jewishly acceptable to remove someone from a ventilator? So, as Jews, we do many things that keep us tied to the land and to those times before the destruction of the temple. Every Jewish festival harkens back to something that was happening in the land of Israel. As a kid in Hebrew school, uh, it was pretty odd to be celebrating festivals of spring and learning about celebration of blossoming trees when Cincinnati, Ohio was snowing outside. But as a Jew, I have always lived in the West, physically in the West. I'm a third generation American, with my religious observance in my heart in the East. So, with the advent of Judaism as codified by the Pharisees, there's a quote in there that's not by a Jew and not even by someone I necessarily support, but we sort of freed ourselves of the hope that the sea would ever rest and instead figured out a way to sail through the winds of history. The Crusades, the Inquisition, the reign of the Ottoman Turks, the rise of Hitler and Stalin. And I draw great inspiration from the realization that first, I'm descended from people that found balance between rigidity and flexibility, and that balance between those two ensured our survival. And also that I have inherited and as a rabbi continue to develop a divinely inspired system for how to live in a world during times of celebration and times of crisis, and of course, everything in between. I think the Jewish people have an interesting theology that sustains hope. There's a term tikkun olam, and it means healing the world. It stems from a Jewish belief that when God was creating, the universe was like a clay pot, and it couldn't contain the immensity of God's divine sparks. And so that pot just shattered, sort of like a Jewish Big Bang, I guess. Um, and since that time, Jews believe that we exist in partnership with God. The universe is broken, so we're not real optimistic. The universe is broken. And God chose the Jewish people, were chosen as God's partners in healing, chosen for the special mission of being God's partner in healing a broken world. As a Jew, I find a lot of meaning and purpose and hope in the sense that I am working with God to make the world more just and more kind. Do I believe in God? Yes. But more important, God believes in me and has hope for me as a Jew to do what I can to help redeem the world. In searching for hope, I think that all people long to belong. As a Jew, I know I'm not alone in the world. God is with me, of course, and with others, with actually every person. But so are the Jewish people around the world and in every generation. When I light Shabbat candles on Friday night, there are Jews all over the world doing that. I'm not alone. My ancestors did it. God willing, my descendants will do it. I'm not alone. I'm past, present, and future connected with people. There is community, there's relationship. It's actually impossible to live as a Jew in isolation. A lot of our rituals and prayers require the presence of 10 adult Jews. When someone has died, there are just a ton of things related to grief and mourning and burial and all of that that you truly, truly cannot do if you're by yourself. Um, and I do believe that Jewish hope is sustained by our relationships. In Exodus 25:8, it says, "Build me a sanctuary that I might dwell between them." I'm not commanded to build a building that God's going to live in. I'm commanded to build sacred relationships and spaces between people where God's hopefully going to dwell. I find hope in that relationship that I have with my ancestors, with my Jewish and non-Jewish neighbors, with my patients, with my family, and with people who are not yet even born. Right now is, I think, an especially tough time to be a Jew. My mom's 92, as I mentioned, and I've lived in the United States my whole life, and I don't think until very recently either of us really experienced real anti-Semitism. Um, there have been just recently just so many terrorist attacks against Jews. And I think what's been very painful is in not, I'll just say my lifetime, even not even going back in history, when there have been attacks against Muslims, I was there. You know, September 11th happened. There was a lot of backlash against Muslims, and there I was forming a circle around the mosque so that Muslims could safely get to worship services. I worked with Muslims around. We had a period where we worked on dialogue groups for teenagers. Black, Israeli, Palestinian. We brought some people into the U.S. to do that. Um, Also, African Americans, a lot of work there in African American Jewish dialogue with LGBTQ. I was one of the earlier chaplains. I'm this elderly, I feel, talking about it, who was one of the earlier chaplains to be sitting with patients who had AIDS, who had been cut off by their families and sometimes their churches. Um, Thanks. But anyway, with these particular terrorist attacks, there has been a very strong movement to blame Jews. Um, and that has not been the case, Russia attacking the Ukraine, stuff that's gone on, the Chinese government, even the United States. September 11th happened, and the world was like, oh, we're grieving for the Americans, we're grieving for the Americans. I can't, maybe there were, but I can't remember anyone who said, well, don't you know the US policies in the Middle East are horrible and no wonder, of course, the Muslim world is attacking the Twin Towers. There wasn't that. And with all these attacks against Jews, I mean, a US citizen tried to firebomb a synagogue in Detroit area. And people said, well, he's a US citizen, he immigrated, but oh, he has family, back in the Middle East. And I'm like, he's a US citizen. I mean, my family, maybe came from Russia or Germany, but I'm not hunting down Germans, in the United States. So anyway, that's been really hard. And it has, and first of all, just the actual friendships lost. I mean, people that I was swimming at their pools, they were maybe coming to a Passover Seder, and that, October 7th, just not on speaking terms. Um, and not, I mean, they're not speaking to me, and there have been some attempts. And it's gone so far that the chair of the Pride Parade in Cincinnati was Jewish, and he was forced to resign. He was told, you're either oppressed or oppressor, and if you're Jewish, you're oppressor. So you cannot be, even though you've been gay your whole life and parents are Holocaust survivors and whatever, you cannot be in charge of the Gay Pride Parade. There's a group called Festival of Faiths. It's a wonderful program that takes place at Xavier Sintas Center, and a member of their board, who's actually, I think, a founding member, is Jewish. And they were told that Muslims would not participate unless she stepped down. Um, so there's just been all these places where I feel like where Jews have been supportive, we're being pushed out of those spaces, pushed out from the right because, there's a strong movement from the right to of Christian nationalism. So, that America should be a Christian nation, even though I'm third generation American and Jews helped with the founding of America too. But then from the left that, well, you can't be part of the Gay Pride Parade if you're Jewish, that kind of thing. And even just one more I'll mention before I kind of conclude. There was a Nazi flag that was hung out over a bridge in Lincoln Heights, and they, like, I hate to be flip as clergy, but things like that happen, and they call one clergy person from each group to sit, and each person says their own, isn't this terrible? Isn't this terrible? And then people say a prayer and hold their signs, and that's that. And the rabbi that they invited was uninvited. He was disinvited shortly after being invited because people, felt that you're either oppressor or oppressed, and he was clearly oppressor. And it just, the craziness to me of not being allowed to have a Jew on a protest against a Nazi flag, that's a bad sign. I mean, that's very scary for me as a Jew living in America. And I am extremely, not all, every Jew is different. I'm extremely American. I mean, people have said to me, what would you do if, like what happened in World War II in Germany? And I'm like, oh, I would die proclaiming that I'm an American. This is my country. So anyway, that's just me. But despite all of that, I am joyfully Jewish. There were people who walked into the gas chambers in Auschwitz singing. The day after that terrorist attack that occurred on a Jewish holiday on October 7th, resulting in the death of 1,200 Jews in Israel, I celebrated the holiday that was at that time. It's called Simchas Torah, rejoicing the Torah. Torah is our scripture that's written on scrolls that are kept in the synagogue. And on Simchas Torah, we dance with Torah scrolls, and I danced with Torah scrolls, as sad a time as that was. At my daughter's wedding, it's the Jewish custom. The groom smashes a glass under his foot, which it's a Jewish custom that recalls the destruction of the temple in the year 70. We're still remembering the destruction of the temple in the year 70. And it reminds us of Tikkun Olam. It reminds us that the world is broken. And still, even with that remembering the destruction of the temple, remembering that the world is broken, we danced the Jewish hora. And my daughter's adopted from China, so we also brought in Chinese lion dancers who were dancing the Jewish hora, which was a lot of fun. Jews like Irving Berlin wrote God Bless America. Harold Arlen and Yip Harburg wrote the Anthem of Hope, Somewhere Over the Rainbow. Jewish comedians like Groucho Marx, Mel Brooks, and Adam Sandler, they make us laugh. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Kivi Kaplan, a lot of people who aren't in the Jewish community don't realize, he was a Jewish guy who was head of the NAACP. Louis Brandeis, Supreme Court Justice, all of those folks committed themselves to Tikkun Olam. Um, these are all examples of Jews who resisted those who would deplete hope. They and I choose life, justice, and joy, even when others are choosing hate and intolerance. And that strength of spirit, I think, is the greatest thing that gives me hope, that opportunity to be joyfully Jewish, no matter who is wanting or trying to take that from me. So I wanted to turn it back to you all. I guess I haven't been with your group, so I don't know what you usually do it, but what gives you hope? What depletes hope? Do you want to talk about the quotes? Were there certain quotes that appeal to you or bother you? I'll just kind of turn it back to your group.
Yeah. If I have one question that it
Yeah.
really doesn't relate to the issue of hope, but you've brought up something that has always been curious to me, and I asked my Jewish friends about this, and I have not a lot of Jewish friends, but I have probably a dozen or so who I'm in some communication with. I actually have a next door neighbor who is an Israeli citizen who
Mm.
here temporarily. And I've asked them this question that it's always confusing to me to conflate what Judaism is, because a person, from my perspective, it seems that a person can be a Jew whose mother and perhaps her father were Jewish. As I understand it, it relies on the maternal side. It could be someone who has adopted the Jewish faith or had that
Mm.
part of him. Or famously, Sammy Davis Jr. was Jewish,
Right, right.
and as I mentioned to Elor, my neighbor, it's also an Israeli citizen. So it baffles me why we can't separate those issues. You mentioned that you're a very loyal American, so it is possible to be a devout Jewish person, but not be in favor of the state of Israel or not
Mhm.
favor of Netanyahu's policies. What's your take on that? Is that something that people wrestle with? That I want to be loyal to my faith, but that does that mean I have to accept this political entity?
Yeah. So I do want to just clarify a couple of things for me and then something else that's just my own little thing. I'm not anti-Zionist. I mean, I am Zionist, which for me means a belief that Jews are entitled to have self-governance. So, and it's come up to being in the land of Israel, right? This has gone on a long time, late 1800s, working for the state of Israel. And, you know, the people who live there, I mean, I was talking with a guy another day. I mean, his grandparents were born there. We're not talking about people who are just up and moved there now. So I'm not anti-Zionist. However, I am American. And as a Jew, I guess there is a tension between the land of Israel, the state of Israel, and the government of Israel. Um, this is me personally as a rabbi with Jews I might lead. I don't see how a person can be Jewish and not have a strong tie to the land of Israel. All of our holidays, all of our prayers, I don't see how one can do any Jewish observance without feeling a tie to that land. Um, and actually, there are some Hasidic Jews who do not recognize the state of Israel, but some of them live there, and so they just call it the land of Israel. They won't call it Israel. Um, but yeah, so I do think there's that tie to the land of Israel is impossible to sever. I mean, there may be, like I said, two Jews, three opinions. There may be those who disagree. Um, and again, I am Zionist. I do believe that you know that why should Jews be unique in terms of not having a place where we can live freely and govern? Um, and And then, going back to being American, um, does that mean I have supported every policy of every president, or that I live in America and don't think that there are horrible injustices that I need to be a part of rectifying as an American? I mean, big difference to be brought here in shackles as a slave than to bring here fleeing persecution. Big difference. And there's a lot that needs to happen there. Um, and then in terms of like those politics of Israel, it is very, very complicated. And I think that one of the dangers that we've had in our country, both with Jews and non-Jews, I'm talking US citizens, is oversimplifying what goes on there. It's very complicated. Um, I'll just share one small thing, even though it's been a lot of years. I have lived in Israel. I went to high school in Israel, and we did do like our public school, and the public school that was mostly Palestinians. They had these like dialogue groups, and we did team building exercises and all that stuff. Um, and I also, when I was older and living in Israel, participated in this sort of model UN thing where everybody was assigned a country and they gave you little, questions. And I got Palestinians, I got Palestine, and all these other people. They had Arab nations, they had Europe, and I was running around and nobody wanted to talk to me. None of them. I'm not talking about Jews or Americans. Nobody. I didn't have oil. I didn't have, I just didn't have anything that anyone else wanted. And I'm running around this Model UN thing and nobody wanted to talk with me. So it's very complicated. It is not just you know, Jews, Palestinians, or the Jews are the white people. Most of the Jews in Israel were fleeing Arab lands. They're from Yemen, they're from Morocco. You don't find Jews in Iran anymore, or in Iraq. They had to flee. So I think it's a lot more the whole government of Israel and what should happen politically is very, very complex. But I guess my short answer again is that there's the land of Israel. I don't see how a Jew can say they are not tied to the land of Israel. There's the ideal of Zionism that Jews should be a free people in a free land. And that, most Jews fall in that camp, but there are now some who are questioning that. And I think it's a hard thing to question because what if you just question America's right to exist? Like, Israel's there, like it's been a country. So when someone says they're anti-Zionist, I really have to ask, well, what does that mean? I mean, does that mean you want to just take all the Jews out of the land of Israel? I mean, they've been there for generations and generations. Does that mean you want a government that doesn't have Jews in it? Like, what is it that being anti-Zionist would mean? And then last but not least, this do I support everything that the Jewish government in Israel does? No, and I mean, and I'm not a political scientist, but I told you I'm very American. I don't support everything our government does. I don't think our, country is without injustice. So I think it is a double standard to say specifically Israel
Yeah.
has to go or is terrible because, they have political injustice.
Well, thank you for answering the question. It was a little off topic. We were talking about hope
Yeah.
tonight, but I'd like to hear from everyone else if you have questions. Fire away. Come on, don't be shy.
And it's okay to jump on the hope quotes too if you want to talk
Larry,
about your own experience of
you
hope.
introduced this topic. I'm really curious.
Yeah,
Your
yeah. I
perspective.
read the list of quotes, and I was really struck by the first one. The reason that I brought the topic up is because of my own disheartedness on the political environment in our country, and where it's leading not only our country but is having ramifications around the world. Policies that I don't agree with, and I think are counterproductive. And the issue is, where do I find hope? I'm 70 something old person. So what impact can I have, and where do I find a reason or a path to try to influence that? And I really like the first quote that talked about uh, that the difference between optimism and hope, and hope being it is an active is an activity. Hope is an action.
Mm.
It's something that you do, and you try to find some way to influence that outcome that you think is going to be desirable. And in thinking through that, what my role might be in all that, I come to the conclusion that I can't do a whole lot directly to influence the state of being in the world as we see it now and where it might be heading. But frankly, it's not my job for that. I think if I'm going to have an influence, my influence would come on other people who are younger, who have certainly have a greater stake in the outcomes of the actions that are taken today. And so, my focus would be how can I influence the next generation? How can I help them see some of the issues maybe in a different light than they might otherwise find? Because the battle is really theirs. Our battle was in the 60s, in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, when there was just a huge cultural upheaval in this country that ultimately spread around the world, where people were, the rights of people became more preeminent than they had been in the past, and different ideas and a lot of new things were flowing forward. That's what I think we contributed to that, and for good or ill. Some of it went way too far, but it did change things. It changed things for people in important ways, and we're coming upon that particular scenario again, I think. And I think that what we can do, or what I can do, is try to find ways to influence those that I'm in contact with, who are in the next generation, who are either going to have an influence on that, or they're going to fight the battle. They're going to pay the cost of that, or they're going to suffer through it. They're going to feel the brunt of it. So it's like an enlightenment. So that's my evolution over the last few weeks in this topic, because that where I started was, God, we're going to hell in a handbasket, and what can I do about that to stop it? And the answer is not much, but I can help other people maybe find a path to do that, particularly the people that I have influence with.
I'd like to say a few things, Elena, and yeah, it's about hope. And I got behind a truck a couple 3 days ago, and stop sign, and the bumper sticker said, "We are all going to die." Big print. Below it said, "Have a good day." And I found that at first kind of offensive, but both of those are equally, perfectly, completely true. And I saw it as a bifurcation of, this is a true thing. We're all headed there, and we need to remember it. We need to be aware of it in our lives if we're going to look at become whole people and become whole minded about it all. At the same time, have a good day seemed to me very positive. So that kind of launched me into some thinking, and I've read your quotes very carefully. I come from Iowa. I was in a Catholic seminary through my college years in Dubuque, Iowa.
I know where
There are
Dubuque
people
is.
from Chicago and everywhere. And Dubuque has a tremendous history. Julian Dubuque, the Frenchman. So it's a very, very old school. Loras College, it's called. And during that time, I was kind of a rote Catholic, growing up completely Czech, Bohemian specifically, Dvorak, Smetanas on my mother's side. and
Wow.
Brolik, Vislisel on the other side. And so I was steeped in Czech Catholic, but not completely, because there was the Hussite Presbyterian Czech Protestants who were, if you know Jan Hus and his rebellion 100 years before Martin Luther in Bohemia. He was another monk who started criticizing the behavior of the church, the selling of indulgences and all, and got burned at the stake in about 1400 and some, after being summoned there in a couple weeks of trial, monkey trial. He was burned at the stake. Martin Luther, later founding what became Lutheranism, and maybe even more expansive than that, learned the lesson 100 years later of how to protect himself in all of that. So that's kind of the stuff that I come out of. And after graduate school, I came to Louisville as a Vista volunteer after graduate school. And by then, the University of Iowa, which was a Bertrand Russell atheistic philosophical center, big time, I dropped away. For many, many, many years, I was away. I just quit practicing. I quit believing. I didn't know what I believed. I was never really an atheist, just an agnostic. But recently, in doing Bible study and getting back into it, we never had the privilege as Catholics of really going deeply into the New Testament, the Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John stuff, let alone going into the Old Testament. So I know from the nuns in grade school, that's how I learned Bible history. You know, marvelous stories, marvelous events, and so on. But I have come back in this deep, deep way, and this leads me into my hope theme. I think of faith, hope, and charity, Christian major virtues. I think hope is it's kind of a buttress or a support for faith. But I think it can also exist completely separately. And so in my personal efforts around that and the consideration of the Trinity, I have focused on hope as being the forgotten virtue, as the one that really covers. You may have faith, but if you're a thinking person, you also realize that, you know, maybe this might not be true, especially with backgrounds like mine or university backgrounds and so on. So coming back in and respecting hope as this wonderful, charismatic virtue that we rely on, and that's become more and more central in my life. All that is really to say that I think it's my countryman Václav Havel who quoted, and Oliver Sacks leading on. I simply do not agree that I think optimism must precede hope, because pessimism, the opposite of optimism, doesn't lead you very well into hope. Now I'm talking all of this on a personal struggle around the Trinity and its meaning. I think of hope actually as a female virtue. I think of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. I've come to believe that the Holy Spirit is really the feminine part. God the Father, the Son, and there's Mom, who brings hope. So hope just has emerged as this giant feature in my personal life. Then I want to also finally comment on what leads me into hope in the world I see around me as I see it declining and so many problems in our own country going to hell in a handbasket in many ways. That's the way I look at it. So what is hope? I find it in the growth of independence, people who have decided that neither party they've all got their hands deeply into this. So becoming an independent so you can choose one way or another is really important. I see that as a positive. I think young people, especially those who are leading the way in colleges and universities for saying, what's wrong with this world? How are we treating immigrants and so on? The uprising of those young people, enough numbers, and I think growing numbers, are saying there's something wrong with how this country and the world is dealing with other people. And we've got to find a way to include everybody. That's what our Constitution calls for, and so on. And I think even in our current president, who intervened in a soccer game by rescuing inappropriately and crazily, by using his influence to get that committee to decide that to let that player back in when he had done what he had done, is now backfiring. It's kind of a karma in now he's being confronted by the duplicity of that and so on. That gives me hope. There are so many things going on in that arena. That's where I draw my hope these days, in the political, the social, the human world, if you want.
Yeah.
So let me say that in terms of
Dave, could we get some other input here? I hate to cut you
all
short,
right, yeah, I'll come back to
but
stuff.
you've thrown a lot into the mix here. So
Yeah, I know I have, but
Yeah.
I thought this would be my major chance to say what's on my mind and how I'm analyzing all of this. So thank you.
I'll just say one thing, and I do want to hear from the other David and then Larry, of course. So a lot of people would say to me, "How do you find hope when, especially when I worked in blood cancer, when you're dealing with so much death and dying?" And I trained at Children's Hospital, so that seems like ancient history. But I would say to people, I just come home and I hug my kid that much tighter, and I love my family that much more. Um, that I'm referring back to the bumper sticker that said, "We're all gonna die. Have a nice day." Working in my field, yes, I'm really see death up close. And I'll tell you one cute story. My mom's 92, and in our synagogue, in all synagogues, they have a prayer list for people who are ill. And we also, I guess, celebrate, observe the anniversary of when people who have died. So, my poor mom, 92, she knows more people on the list of people who have died than she does sitting in the congregation sometimes. But yeah,
Yes.
but her thing was, my daughter had a surgery and she said, "Oh, you're not going to let them put you on that prayers for healing list, are you?" And my daughter was like, "Well, yeah, I mean, why wouldn't I?" And my mom says, "Oh, everyone I have ever seen on that prayers for healing list ends up on the dead list eventually." I love how she said
Surprise,
eventually.
surprise.
And we're like, "Well, yeah, mom, eventually." Okay, okay, like I'm not going to argue with you. You're 92.
No,
But
no.
but yes, we are all going to die, and have a nice day. This is your big shot, this moment. So yeah. David Wunderlin or Larry, we haven't heard, or Larry, I guess David Wunderlin, you've been our quiet
Uh,
one.
yes, I've been listening. One of the things that you said early on there, Elena, was the point of the connection to the past, the present, and the future, and that is relevant to me in the sense of hope and the progress of civilization in so many ways. There's technology, and there's culture, and there's the ability to live a better life as you define it. And I believe I know how my grandparents lived, how my parents lived, how I've lived, how my children live, and I see on a personal level the progress of civilization and the connection to the past as well as to the future. I was reflecting the other day, if I lived if I was born 100 years before I was born, I'd be dead now for sure. I wouldn't have had the medical care available to me. If I were born 100 years after I was born, no telling. And it's fascinating to think about what life will be, what culture will be, and all of that for me is a very hopeful uh, aspect. I love the quote that you sent about sail the seas, you're not going to quiet them.
Hmm.
And
We must free ourselves of the hope that the sea will ever rest. We must learn to sail in the high winds. Hmm.
yeah, and and of course, one of the other things in there was hope is an active verb. It's not passive. And there was the comment, it takes courage to have hope and to be hopeful and to express hope within myself and to other people. There's hope. We're not all going to hell. We're not falling apart. And we've always had trouble and we've always gotten through it. And so we have the choice of either sail those waters or drift in those waters. Well, sailing sounds like a better idea to me. So have the courage, have the strength, have the participation in what is all around me uh, to do that. And there's the expression, leave things better than you found it. Leave it, whatever it is, the land, the relationship, yourself, better than it was. And so to me, that's an expression of hope as well. And now at my age, at our ages, guys, we have the wisdom of having lived through all of this, all of the turmoil. Larry, you mentioned the 60s. When people tell me how bad it is right now, I said, were you alive in 1965? Come on, man. It's, with great turmoil compared to today and the Civil War and so on. So anyway, I see one of my roles is to share that wisdom, that perspective of hope, to be active in that respect. Ta-da.
Very
Mm.
nice.
Mm. Well done, David.
Mhm. Um, yeah, it's, I think there is, that if a person waits for, it's always going to be some damn thing. I mean, that's just the reality of life.
Yep.
And so I think if we wait to have joy until everything's at peace, that's not going to happen. It's just, your life ends up not, you end up not living in this one life that we have. Um, and then I do think too that, hope we, that what we do does matter. Um, I think that's an important thing. And as people talk about loss of hope, I think some of that is sometimes thinking that what we do doesn't matter. Um, or another thing that's made this is the thing that's been most troubling to me right now in society. Um, I think that there, for much of my life, was a sense that other people who believed differently than I did cared. And now I find this attitude that if you don't believe as I do, it means that you don't care. And I think of, the respect that there was between Antonio Scalia and Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I mean, they really disagreed on what the Constitution fundamentally says. They really disagreed on what justice means in America, but they would still go to opera together. And you never had any of them on TV or in the news saying, ah, they don't care about America. They don't care about justice. They don't care about the Constitution. Only I do. And I do see that happening now. And that that's hard for me. That is something that depletes my hope.
Michael, do you have hope? You have it behind you. Do you have it in front of you?
I uh, I guess I have to frame it in a slightly different way because I'm not a deist. I don't depend upon cultural or religious tradition to formulate my thoughts. Although I grew up in the Catholic Church, and I was deeply into that. But I my feeling is that it can become a retreat to base your hope on, you know, I like the quote from Aristotle Onassis about learning to sail the seas. Although he was a ship magnate, I guess it was
Yeah.
easier for him. But uh, I I think the thing that is missing today, and one of the reasons why we hear this topic discussed so often, is that we keep trying to apply old solutions to new problems.
Mm.
That it's not, what worked for people 100 years ago or 1,000 years ago. I'm sure was the best they could imagine. They created not only a society, but a way of thinking that helped them cope with what the challenges that they faced. And so it's tempting to say, well, if we could just go backward, if we could just get back to the way it used to be, then things would be okay. I don't believe that. And I think we have to look at the the advance of our knowledge and our ability to control our environment, and now come up with a new solution, not necessarily a new religion, but a new way of thought that makes sense to young people, that gives them that hope or that optimism about their future. For example, someone in school right now, starting into college, what do they hope to achieve? It used to be that if you went through and you got a bachelor's degree or a master's degree, that you were employable and you had an assurance of a pretty secure future. That's not true anymore. So what do we offer people as a vision for the future? And I think that's very difficult. It's difficult for all of us. I mean, the impact of artificial intelligence, remember, it's only been a year. All the stuff we're talking about with AI, it's only been 1 year. So we're just in the infancy of this whole new process. And what we're missing is someone who can help guide us through here so that we can maintain an optimism, so we can keep hope alive, if you will. That you can't say, well, if you just have faith and pray to somebody, then it's going to come in. No, that doesn't make sense to young people. It doesn't make sense to me. So I think the idea of hope is a challenge, and I think it has to come back to the individual. You have to be able to be assured that you can adapt, you can evolve, you can change, and a confidence that no matter what the challenge that comes up, we can take that on. And I went through this personally I guess, in the 1980s when, new technology was coming at me, and I had to decide, am I going to fight it, or am I going to cope with it, or am I going to master it? And I tried, not always successfully, to look forward and look at the next thing that was coming up and approach that with confidence that, yeah, I can do that. I can learn that. I can master that. And I think that's what it comes down to for individuals. So those who would say to young people, just follow us and just do as I tell you to and everything, I think that's crap. I think you have to empower them individually and encourage them to face whatever problems they have with confidence, and they'll find their own sense of hope. So that's kind of where I am.
Yeah, and I see that coming out of, sort of the Jewish experience I talked about, destruction of the temple. The way we were doing things was not going to work anymore. That temple was gone. the Romans tore it down, saying, sitting down and praying to God to just bring that back, that was not going to happen in that moment. And nor was sitting around saying, this is it, this is it. If the temple's destroyed, we're through. Having to say, we're in a new era now. We're not living in Jerusalem. We're dispersed. We can't do temple sacrifices. So what is it how are we going to imagine how to keep going? And one of my fears about the education system right now is that I think that we have not encouraged people to think imaginatively or analytically. There's teaching to the test and not the creative problem solving. And I do understand the pragmatism that young people have of saying, well, how much money is this going to make me, this education? And if it's not training me to do something that will make money, why would I learn it? But there is, I think, a mind honing that comes from studying liberal arts or math or things that aren't just practical skills, that gives us imagination. And Jonas Salk, the number 3 guy, who was Jewish, but polio vaccine, hope lies in dreams, in imagination, and in the courage of those who dare to make dreams into a reality. So, yeah.
Mhm.
So yeah, thank you. I think that's all of you have really insightful stuff and based on life experience.
Yeah. Some other questions, comments, gentlemen?
I think of the Jewish people as the goats of hope, the greatest of all time.
Oh, great, saw that.
To have hope after all the tribulations and persecutions and disruption. I mean, how many adjectives can you put on that? So I like to look to the Jewish faith for hope, guidance in hope.
Mm.
Yeah, I thought of that when you were talking before about the Jewish tradition and that the notion of the chosen people. I learned from a theologian a long time ago that chosen does not mean necessarily favored and rescued. It means what it would if you were a soldier and you were chosen for to lead the attack.
Yeah.
You've
Yeah,
got the
yeah,
most dangerous
chosen.
position.
Yeah, we were chosen to do the work of repairing the world.
Yeah.
It's a responsibility,
Yeah,
not a total gift.
right.
But David, Wunderlin, you were saying about the Jewish people and the trials and tribulations, and maybe I'm biased having worked in a hospital, but I every person that I have worked with has found some method of survival, even if they died. It's kind of hard to put our minds around that, but that hope. And I know that number 16, every day begins with an act of courage and hope, getting out of bed. So yeah. So I think a lot of times, and especially as people grow older, more infirm, and they feel like their world is shrinking, there's less and less that they can do. I try to remind people we are human beings, not human doings. So if you wake up in the morning and it is an act of courage and hope to say, what kind of person am I going to be today? Not just what am I going to do today? Because, David, Vislisel, you had talked about, not knowing what to do and feeling like, what we do isn't helping. And sometimes it's not a matter of what we do. It's how we are in the world, just what we bring to the world. Yeah.
Role model, yes.
Basically, Elena, just to make it clear, I can't think of anybody who deserves a country and a land, especially the historical land, as much as the Judean people do. Um, so there's no question, and I support Zionism to the extent that, we know there's a history there. We know how it was supposed to be a blend of people, and you guys you'll work it out because some of you are married to each other. Some of you, you've lived in these historical villages together for so long, you've almost, you may still practice this religious practice and the other religious practice, but they seem to have gotten along pretty well. There was the introduction then, of course, of led by the British and maybe more than anybody else, Harry Truman. So it's set up. The people are moving in there, and it's supposed to be shared and continued. We're going to be a happy land here, and everybody's going to get along with each other. Well, it didn't turn out that way. And part of the reason it didn't turn out that way, although, as you say, it's extremely, extremely complex, is that it turned out the way it has now. And who's got the control? Who's got the atomic power? Who's got the bully pulpit? Who's got it's control? And I have a couple of Jewish friends who visit Palestine, and they really are absolutely upset, although they are Jewish. One came out of a New York rabbinical, very conservative Orthodox tradition. And he's been a champion for what to do with the Palestinians. Why can't they be treated in some way equally? But the bottom line is the power is in the hands of Israel right now. So their problem is what to do with those Palestinians who don't like what's going on. They don't like that their lands are divided up. They don't like that their olive groves are separated by a fence, one from the other. So that's a problem, really, that I don't know how that can be solved other than through the authority and the power of Israel as a nation today. So that's the big challenge, as I see it, is how can they create peace and acceptance and some kind of balance in that land. And that includes a fairness to everybody. The same problem we have in this country is the way we treat our immigrants, the way we hunt them down, the way we ice them out, the way we throw them into prisons, we deport them, and so on. It's a system that pretends to be one thing. We're going to get the criminals out of here, but then does all kinds of atrocious things to collar everybody and let's get rid of everybody. That's our problem to solve, and hopefully the powers that be, the balance of powers, the Senate, the House, the presidency, the Supreme Court the way it is. We've got to figure out how to do that, and I'd say the same burden lies with the Israeli government who controls everything. So, just wanted to say that.
Okay. Well, I mean, I think you have two peoples who want self-determination. And I mean, this me speaking personally and having lived in Israel, I don't think Israelis can dictate to Palestinians what self-determination will look like for them. And so like you say, well, it's
what can they do, Elena?
what can
can the
Israelis
government
do or
do to set the
Palestinians?
stage for how to solve it? I mean,
Yeah,
this is
so
going to go on forever unless it's solved, obviously.
So I truly, truly don't have the easy solution. And I get frustrated when people feel that they have the easy solution.
There is no easy solution.
Right. And also remembering that you have, you know, that it's not just the Israelis and Palestinians, right? I mean, there are groups, all kinds of political and religious and religio-political groups
Yes.
fighting for you said control of the Middle East. And when I did that Model UN thing, it really struck me that all of these Arab nations who are like, oh, free Palestine, that, I don't know that they care so much about the Palestinians. There are reasons that they there are reasons that they want Israel gone. There are reasons that they, are supporting this, but I do feel like the Palestinians are very much victims, and so are the Israelis. It's just really, you have two peoples with claims to the land, and a lot of countries that have stake in this. And in the end, I think the thing is that these are real people with real lives, you know?
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bottom line, it's one by one by one. How am I treated? How am I seen? How do I feel about how I'm being treated and so on? Yeah. So it's extremely complex. Yes.
Yeah.
I don't know whether it's solvable. Perhaps it's not. Perhaps
Yeah.
it's not. And
Well, I don't
maybe
know. I know we probably need to wrap up. I'll leave that to Michael or not. As I say, I do have time. But I'll tell you something that gave me hope on the Middle Eastern front. And it was oh gosh, who I think it was Jon Stewart was the interviewer, but there was a Palestinian guy whose brother had been killed by the Israeli army, and an Israeli guy whose brother had been killed in a Palestinian terrorist attack. And they have joined forces to try to develop understanding. They really listened to each other. They were able to reach a point of saying, your pain is not more than mine, your pain is not less than mine. What can we do to build understanding? And it was very hopeful. The moderator said, so how did you two meet? And the Palestinian guy said, J-date, the Jewish meeting, not J-date. So he had a sense of humor. But I think, that is something that gives me hope. Again, that these two individuals were able to say, we both have human experience. Mine is not, this isn't, in the Olympics of who's the bigger victim, nobody wins. We have both lost family. We have both experienced traumatic things. What can we give each other in the world to be better? And they set aside, what I said before, well, I care about humanity and you don't, or I care about humanity and you don't, or I care about peace and you don't. There was none of that. There was, we are two men who have had people in our lives die. And that's a point of connection for us. So yeah, I think that's it. There has to be the human connection. You asked about governments and politics and what are the policies. I think in the end, it's really that person to person. I said the relationship, building that space that God can dwell amongst us. And I had very much hope in that interview. The Palestinian and the Israeli man, they really built that space where God could dwell between, acknowledging. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we've kind of drifted away from hope, but I do want to share one story with you because I think it applies here. I feel like the United States makes the situation worse. We should not interfere here. We're not a very good example. We came into this land and we committed genocide on the natives here. So if Israel is looking to us as a model, we don't represent a very, very striking model. But the story I had was I have 4 children. I have 2 children by birth and 2 stepchildren, and the 2 oldest boys were fighting, and it was discord all the time. And I finally got fed up with them. And I took them into the kitchen and I took out 2 knives and put them in front of them. And I said, now, either get along with each other or kill each other. That's the choice.
Wow.
Of course, it was a serious time and it shocked them, but it stopped the fighting.
Wow.
I wouldn't dare do it again.
Right.
But I did it at a moment of utmost frustration. I said, this can't go on. You can't keep doing this. One way or the other, you've got to settle this. And I think
Yeah.
if the United States did not support either side anymore, they would be forced to reconcile. But
Hmm.
that's, I don't know. That's a
Interesting.
dangerous tack to take too. So unless we've got additional comments, I want to thank you very much. I
Oh,
really
you're
appreciate it.
welcome.
It's been a very interesting
Yes,
discussion.
Elena.
And
Thank you so much for
Thank you,
being here.
Elena.
Thank
Welcome.
you.
it's
Yeah, it
wonderful.
really was a pleasure. I enjoyed hearing your thoughts and experiences as well.
Yeah.
So thank you for inviting me and giving me time to talk. Everybody likes to talk, right?
Well, we like to listen here too. So thank you, everyone. And
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
hope we'll meet again.
Yes, yes, and good night. And David Wunderlin, I'll surely see you again.
Yes,
Okay.
Good
indeed.
night. Peace to all.
Good
Yeah.
night.